Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to see everyone this evening. Really appreciate your presence, especially if you happen to be visiting with us online. We appreciate your coming to join us in Bible study, which for this evening, Hosea chapter 8, if you'd like to be turning over there. I'm going to have Brother Charles or someone in the back operating the slides because I didn't realize my battery on my iPad had gone. So anyway. Well, if we're going to be doing chapter 8, the natural and normal thing to do would be to read it. So why don't we start off by reading Hosea chapter 8. Put the trumpet to your lips, like an eagle against the house of the Lord, because they have transgressed my covenant and rebelled against my law. They cry out to me, "My God, we of Israel know you." Israel has rejected the good. The enemy will pursue him. They have set up kings, but not by me. They have appointed princes, but I did not know it. With their silver and gold, they've made idols for themselves, that they might be cut off. He has rejected your calf, O Samaria, saying, "My anger burns against them." How long will they be incapable of innocence? For from Israel is even this. A craftsman made it. Yield. For they have gone. Wow. Excuse me, I have no idea what's happening here. Am I okay? I'm not like, okay. Wow, excuse me. For they have gone up to Assyria like a wild donkey all alone. Ephraim has hired lovers. Even though they hire allies among the nations, now I will gather them up, and they will begin to diminish because of the burden of the king of princes. Since Ephraim has multiplied altars for sin, they become altars of sinning to him. Though I wrote for him 10,000 precepts of my law, they are regarded as a strange thing. As for my sacrificial gifts, they sacrifice the flesh and eat it, but the Lord has taken no delight in them. Now he will remember their iniquity and punish them for their sins. They will return to Egypt. For Israel has forgotten his maker and built palaces, and Judah has multiplied fortified cities. But I will send a fire on its cities, that it may consume its palatial dwellings. Wow, not just a whole lot of hope in that one. Pretty dark. God clearly is rather angry. And it starts off with a reference to trumpets. Dun, 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 dun. What are trumpets about in whenever you read them in the Old Testament? Yeah, it's about war. It's what would sound if normally you would have watchmen on the walls of a city, and if they saw something looked like an army coming their way, well, the first thing they would do is blow the trumpet because they wanted everyone to know what was going on. We need to get ready. We need to shut the gates. We need to pull in supplies. We need to prepare for all of this because war is coming. And that's what the trumpet here is referencing. In fact, after a fashion, you might almost kind of think about it perhaps in terms of being several trumpets being blown here, because he is going to be talking about several different sins or things that he has against Israel. that is going to be talking about and about which he is going to be punishing them. But he does go on here to talk about, like an eagle, the enemy comes against the house of the Lord. What's the meaning of the enemy coming like an eagle?
Mess around when he flies high and goes where he wants to go.
And he's quick. And he's quick. You know, he comes out of nowhere and bang, you're done. Yeah.
Eagles sometimes are referred not and qualities of both.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. The point here essentially, however, is very simply this, that it is a matter of swiftness. Frequently, whenever you see eagles being referenced in the Old Testament, it has a lot to do with swiftness. That it's just that quick. And that's what he's talking about here. Meaning of the eagle is probably a great deal about swiftness, although it certainly could be also about carrion creatures, vultures. Yeah. So why are all these things happening? He says these things blow the trumpet, the enemy's coming like an eagle. Why, Lord? Why? They have transgressed my covenant, rebelled against my law. Same law, same covenant that they had at one point in their history, all said, yes, we'll obey. Yes, we will keep this covenant. Yes, we will do what you say, anything that you say, Lord. But, of course, there will be some, as it points out here, that will cry out to them, my God, we of Israel know you. What had God been asking for all this time in the book of Hosea? Come to know me. Come to know me. And what's some of the folks, apparently they'd been listening to what Hosea was saying, and some of them were answering, well, yeah, we know Yahweh, we know the Lord, but is it the kind of know that he was asking about? Not at all. God had wanted them to say, we really know you, but God is saying this simply isn't true. And how do we know it's not true? What does verse 2 say? I'm sorry, verse 3. You've rejected the good, so the enemy is going to pursue you. You've rejected the good. What is the good he's making reference to here? What's the good that Israel has rejected? His commands. His commands. You know, I really appreciate the song that we sang just a few minutes ago that talked about his burden is easy, his yoke is light. I found it so. God's commands really have never been intended to burden us. They're always intended for our good. Are they always easy? Well, no, they're not always completely easy to do because of the flesh. We're fighting against the flesh all the time. But in terms of being good, they are the ultimate good. But that wasn't good enough for Israel. We like to do our own thing. We like to make our own decisions. We don't need God telling us what to do. Really, what we need God for is we need God to provide us protection. We need God to provide us with food and so forth and prosperity. But please, keep your opinions to yourself. But that's just not the way that it works, quite clearly. They have set up kings, 4 talks about, but not by me. I didn't know whether you might know this or not. Perhaps you did. But of the 10 dynasties of Israel, only 2 of them were anointed by God. Jeroboam, the very first Jeroboam, and Jehu. They were the only ones that God had actually anointed. Everybody else had just decided to take matters in their own hands and had assassinated people or, gotten involved in some sort of a coup d'etat or revolt or something. That's the way that the throne had changed hands. And especially right toward the very end of Israel's history before they went off into Assyrian captivity, man, there were just a whole bunch of kings that just kind of followed in very rapid succession. But not only had they appointed kings and leaders that did not have God's okay, did not have God's approval. God had not said, yeah, this is the man who should rule you. What else had they done? What had they done with? They had made idols to worship out of what? I mean, it's fairly, I'm not looking for rocket science. Out of silver. What is silver and gold? That was legal tender back in those days. I've made you prosperous. I've given you silver and gold. I have done all of these things. And what have you done with the very gifts I've given you? Turned it into idols. That's a little bit like, I don't know, perhaps you giving a gift to a child and having them turn around and use it in a way that is most offensive to you. It's kind of a slap in the face, sort of an insult of sorts. You've taken the silver and gold that I provided for you. And what'd you do with it? You turned around and made an idol out of it. Great. Clearly we have some mixed up priorities here. With their silver and gold, they have made idols for themselves. And what's going to be the result of all that? What does it mean to be cut off? You read this every once in a while in Scripture, especially in the books of Moses and so forth. What does it mean to be cut off?
Look in another direction when it comes to the blessing.
That certainly is going to be a good piece of it, Jim. What's that? Be abandoned. Sometimes it kind of seems like it has reference to you're going to be killed. But a lot of times it has to do with the fact that you are cut out of the family. And not just cut out of the family, you are cut out of Israel. You are no longer a part of the covenant people anymore. This is the sort of thing that you end up seeing a lot. That, for example, a Sabbath breaker was to be cut off. Now, in some cases, that actually meant execution. There was the death penalty for that. But in other cases, it would appear that it has to do also with just you are no longer a part of Israel anymore. We're not even looking at you. And even to this day, I don't know if you guys knew this or not, but even to this day, especially among the Hasidic Jews, if a Hasidic Jew would, for example, convert to Christianity, you know what they do? They hold a funeral. They hold a funeral. That person is dead to us now. And so that's sort of the idea behind it, sort of the culture behind all of that sort of stuff. And the result, God is saying here, of you choosing your own kings, taking the wealth that I'm providing for you, turning it into idols, is that you will be cut off. In this particular case, it's very much like what Brother Jim was talking about. You are being abandoned. And abandoned by not just family, but by God. That's what you're going to do. You're on your own now. I'm done.
Romans talks about God giving them up.
Yeah. It's exactly what he ended up doing with the Gentiles. And it had everything in the world to do. If you take a look at that passage in Romans, it starts off, the sins actually start off by man not recognizing God and making idols. It always seems to kind of boil down to that, interestingly enough. But they're to be cut off, it says. He has rejected, verse 5. He's rejected your calf, O Samaria, saying, my anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of innocence? What calf is Hosea referring to here? Is God referring to?
Jeroboam had wanted to keep them from going back to Jerusalem to worship. So he set up a golden calf at Dan and Beersheba, so it would be a little convenient. They wouldn't have to make that trip over to Jerusalem.
That's right. This was a part of the sin of Jeroboam. He had set up two idols that looked like calves in the north part of the country, in Dan, the other was in Bethel, right down near the border of Judah. But of course, that wasn't the end of all of the altars, because a little bit later on, we're going to see that they multiplied altars, up having those where there was idols set up. But on every high hill, they apparently were setting up altars. Now, whether that also included idols or not is anyone's guess, but my guess would be, yep, probably so. But it's the calf in particular that he ends up making reference to. And does that remind you of any other incident you can think of in the Bible? Yeah, when Moses was on Mount Sinai and he comes down, and what have they done? Has made a calf, and everybody's rejoicing. Even though the calf, by the way, and incidentally, just as a reminder again, the calf was not actually representing a different god. The calf was representing Yahweh. But that wasn't pleasing to God. He said, really, no images. And actually, there's a great deal of wisdom behind that, because if we start thinking of God in terms of physical things, well, that automatically starts diminishing God and his power and his essence, his nature, who he is, because God is not flesh and blood. What is God made of? Spirit. God is spirit. And there is nothing like him in this world. Nothing like him in this world. Really important thing to keep in mind. If we can somehow or the other turn God into a thing that we can touch, then the human tendency is to think, if I can touch it, I can control it.
That limits us.
Yeah, it limits us too, doesn't it? Because, among other things, and this is going to be one of the complaints that God's going to make against Israel. Your gods are being made by the hands of men, of all things. And you call that a god? Don't you kind of have things reversed a little bit? Isn't it God that's supposed to make man, not man that makes a god? And he says, you Israelites ought to know that. If anybody should know that, you should know that. But apparently, you've forgotten about it. So in any case, he says, I've rejected your calf, O Samaria. My anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of innocence? And this is the reason I was asking a minute ago, does this remind you of any story? And of course it does. Book of Exodus, right? In chapter 32, where the golden calf incident happens. They had been idolatrous for quite a while. He's saying, how long will you be incapable of innocence? How long will it be that you will just decide to revel in your idolatry, revel in your lawlessness, revel in your disobedience to me? How long? How long is it going to take? How many generations have to pass? How many centuries have to go on before you finally get it? Now, of course, it kind of sounds like I'm wagging my finger at them. Do we have our own idols these days? Oh, sure. We've all got our own idols. But there's things that we need to learn about this. God just doesn't like idolatry. God's middle name, as it were, he tells us himself. My name is jealous. Jealousy, by the way, is not necessarily a bad thing. We think of jealousy as being a bad thing and so forth, but jealousy is a bad thing only if you don't really have the right to claim the thing. Jealousy that a husband might have towards a wife who might be fooling around is a perfectly legitimate emotion, to be jealous about that. Now, sometimes teenagers kind of get jealous of each other and because of boyfriend and girlfriend things or whatever, for which they really don't have any right because they don't belong to each other. But did Israel belong to God? Israel belonged to God and had every reason in the world to be jealous. Every reason in the world to be jealous. And we need to consider that as well, because if we are the new chosen people, if we belong to God, what should we be doing? Pleasing Him. Not giving Him, exactly, not giving Him cause to be jealous. Not giving Him cause to be jealous. And it's kind of interesting, verse 6. And I don't know how, does anyone else, is there like a New International Version among us anywhere? How does verse 6 read there?
They are from Israel. This cat, a craftsman has made it. It is not God. It will be broken in pieces. That calf was married.
Okay. My New American Standard says, "For from Israel is even this," which sounds a bit like Yoda talk, if you know what I'm trying to say.
How could such a thing come from Israel? That's right.
Which is, yeah, exactly.
Of all of the world, Israel should know God.
Exactly. Which is what he's saying. And this idolatry, this calf, this is coming from Israel? Really? That's the impact of what he's saying here. It's kind of a short sentence, but what can we read here in a sentence like that? What's going on with God?
He's reflecting on everything He has done for them, everything these people had seen some pretty impressive things. They've witnessed the plagues.
Mm-hmm.
They had witnessed the Red Sea literally opening up and letting them cross on dry ground. They had witnessed the destruction.
They'd eaten manna for 40 years, for crying out loud. All these things. And God hadn't stopped the miracles when they crossed over in the land of Canaan. God continued to, slaying giants and on and on and on we could go. Was God in their lives? Oh my, yes. Had He proven Himself that He was really there? Oh my, yes. And God seems to be almost incredulous about what's going on here. Are you kidding me? I don't know that God would actually do this or not, but if it were me, I'd be going, really? How could this be? How could that happen? But it has. And he really doesn't get it. Well, I mean, I'm sure God gets it, but it really is kind of beyond comprehension. He says, because really a craftsman made it, so it's not God. You must know this. You must know this. He seems to be sort of saying, surely the calf of Samaria will be broken to pieces. And actually the word in Hebrew here is the word splintered, which means what? Yeah. I just scattered it into really small pieces. That's kind of, I think of splinter, I think of like matchsticks or something like that. Just splintered. It'll be destroyed, which again kind of recalls a little bit of what happened even back at Sinai, right? What happened after Moses came down and got angry at everybody? What did they do with the calf?
Ground it up, made them put it in the water.
I don't know. It wouldn't taste too good. Moses ground it up in the powder, put it into the water, made the people drink it.
This is your God? You're
Yeah.
drinking.
You're drinking your God? There you go. So these are the things that God is just having, is trying to reason with them. Really, God? Really, Israel? This is what you're hand making a God and then thinking that it can do things for you? Really? I'm the only God. Why are you doing this? Your calf is going to be broken to pieces. Verse 7. You ever heard of this verse before? They sow the wind and they reap the whirlwind. The standing grain has no heads, it yields no grain. Should it yield, strangers would swallow it up. What is the symbol that wind represents in Scripture most of the time? Think back to, for example, the first one that comes to my mind is Ecclesiastes, where Solomon talks about striving after the wind. What does he mean by striving after the wind?
First of all, you can't see it, and you certainly can't control it. You can't catch it.
And when you think that you've got it, you don't. It's a foolish endeavor. And why is it foolish? Well, because it's vain. It's dumb. You can chase it all day long and you won't catch it. You'll never get a handful. Wind is a symbol oftentimes in the Old Testament of things that are empty, things that are vain. And by vain, I don't talk about, like someone strutting around, but I'm talking about vain like useless. That's the best word for it, useless. Jim?
If you sow your seed in the wind, whirlwind, you're not going to get it.
No, you're right about that.
No reason for it.
Yeah. In this particular case, he is talking about sowing vanity and emptiness, uselessness. And by sowing, he's talking about your living life that way. Your deeds are useless, vain, empty. What you're worshiping is useless, vain, empty. And the result of sowing to the wind is going to be what? Now, there's a difference, isn't there, between a wind and a whirlwind. Now, we don't see all that much of whirlwinds up in New England, but you guys do, right? Come springtime, it's time to start dodging the tornadoes. How destructive are tornadoes? Incredibly destructive. They just leave a path of destruction depending on how wide they are. As far as they're on the ground, they just destroy everything, and you find yourself, no pun intended, blown away by the kinds of things that it will destroy. And that's kind of what he's trying to get to here. You have sown the wind, and you're going to reap destruction. You've sown vanity. You've been following vanity and emptiness. And what it's going to get you is the destruction of your nation, possibly the destruction of your own life, certainly the destruction of your soul. You sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. And his encouragement clearly is to not do that. But beyond all of that, very specifically, he does talk about, as Jim was making reference to the fact that part of this reaping the whirlwind is apparently going to be no crop. He says it yields no grain. Should it yield, strangers would swallow it up. There's going to be famine going on. He is indeed. He is indeed. The physical harvest would reflect the spiritual harvest, which would be nothing but destruction. Verse 8, Israel is swallowed up. They are now among the nations like a vessel in which no one delights. Now, I think I may have made reference, actually I think this past Sunday night, about something known as the prophetic past tense. Anybody remember anything about the prophetic past tense? It's kind of a fancy schmancy theological word, but it really has a really interesting and important concept behind it. What is the prophetic past tense?
That which used to happen was spoken of as already.
Yeah. It's a prophet speaking about things that are going to be happening in the future as if they... And the impact of such a statement is this prophecy is so certain, it is as if it's already history. It's as if it happened only yesterday. And that's kind of what he's talking about here. They haven't gone off into exile yet, but he's speaking as if they already have. Israel is swallowed, past tense, up. They are now among the nations, like a vessel in which no one delights. And what is so certain here, as if it were already history, is Israel in exile. 4, verse 9, they have gone up to Assyria like a wild donkey all alone. Ephraim has hired lovers. Kind of an interesting sort of a thing to throw in there, like a wild donkey all alone. What's he trying to say here about their appealing to Assyria? I think he's trying to say that was a dumb move. As we're going to see just a little bit later on, he's going to expand on this just a little bit. Assyria as an ally? Really? Assyria was not going to be an ally. Assyria would come out and probably kick out the guys that you had beaten up on you, but he was the bigger bully than the bully that he was taking care of. That was the problem. Assyria was not going to be really a friend to Ephraim. And the reason, of course, that Israel was looking to Assyria for help had a lot to do with some of the neighbors they had around them, specifically the Egyptians, who were really trying pretty hard to become a new empire of their own. But of course, Assyria was too. The difference between Egypt and Assyria, though, is that in comparison, Egypt was kind of the nice guys, whereas the Assyrians were maybe a little bit closer to the Nazis. Man, I mean, when they came through, they didn't leave anything breathing. In fact, I think we've talked about this before, on the walls of the king of Assyria, it looks like Halloween, because man, they have him. He made sure that he had carved into his walls impaled men, beheaded men, cities that were aflame, all kinds of terrible things that he had done. Piles of hands. And by the way, although that sounds pretty grotesque to us, and it is pretty grotesque, the piles of hands was symbolic of the number of people they had killed, because that's the way in the ancient world that you would take account, as it were. You would have all have their right hands cut off, and you'd bring them to the king to show how many people have been killed of the bad guys. And so on these reliefs, there are piles of hands to show hundreds, thousands he had killed in his war. So these are the people that Israel was coming and saying, hey, protect us from the bully called Egypt. And Assyria is going, sure, no problemo. Be happy to. I can do that for you. And later on, by the way, I'm going to raise your taxes in a really serious way. Ephraim has hired lovers. And when you've got to hire a lover, you might be just a little bit desperate. Verse 10, even though they hire allies among the nations, now I will gather them up, and they will begin to diminish because of the burden of the king of princes. Who is this king of princes? Yeah. The Assyrian kings frequently boasted that all of their princes were kings. And so if that were true, then this particular guy would be a king of kings, as it were. And that's kind of what he's boasting here. He says, you guys, you can hire all the allies you want. Oh, man. You can hire all the allies that you want, but I'm still going to gather all of you guys up. I'm going to diminish you because of the burden, the weight, the load of the king of princes. Essentially, what happened ultimately to Israel? What happened to Israel?
They were taken into Syrian captivity and then sort of dissipated.
They were scattered all over the Fertile Crescent. They were scattered all over what we would today call modern Syria, also modern Iraq, and modern Iran. They were just scattered all over. And frequently ended up kind of totally losing identity as Jews anymore. Many of them did. The point, very simply, however, being that that this is what was going to happen. In fact, the folks, the king of Assyria doesn't want to leave land unoccupied, and so he would actually end up taking a lot of the people that he had conquered in the in the Fertile Crescent and relocating them in the middle of Israel. Ultimately, those folks became the Samaritans because they were folks that were actually Gentiles, but because they were interested in knowing about the God of the land, that's the way they would put it, then the Assyrian king actually gave them a priest of God who taught them about what they ought to be doing. Now later on, whenever Judah came back and tried to rebuild the temple and the city of Jerusalem, the Samaritans became enemies and so forth because they didn't really want the Judeans to come back. But the point, at least, is that that's kind of the history of what's going on. And Hosea is here prophesying about how it is that it's going to be all on the basis of their sin, all on the basis of their looking to other people and other things to rescue them. Why was it such a bad thing that they should look for allies, either Egypt or Assyria for that matter? What was so bad about that?
Well, first of all, those nations were totally repugnant to God.
First of all, they were Gentiles. They were idolaters. They were, in fact, repugnant to God. Well, what was the other problem with it? And this is the more, there you go. That's the more fundamental problem. All along, God had always said, depend on me, depend on me, depend on me. Don't know if you recall this or not, but one of the parts of the law in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, was that Israel was not supposed to have chariots, and that they were to take all the horses that would pull chariots, because as they were going through and conquering the land of Canaan, all the Canaanite cities and so forth, they all had chariots and had horses that pulled them. You know what they were supposed to do to the horses? Hamstring them, so they couldn't pull the chariots. Why would God? And this was significant because the chariot in the ancient world was their version of a tank. This was high-tech warfare as far as they were concerned. Because chariots were fast movers, and you could hide behind the shield of the chariot, and you could have somebody popping up every once in a while and shooting off an arrow, or pop every once in a while and throw a spear. It was armored vehicles that were really quick. And if you knew how to use them right, man, you had yourself a powerful army. So why would God deprive his people of the cutting edge technology of warfare in their day?
Because he was going to fight as far as them if they obeyed him.
Exactly. I want you to depend upon me, not the chariots. I want you to depend upon me and not your numbers. Because, by the way, remember the story about David numbering the people? And about how Joab said, that's not a good idea, David, but David did it anyway. What was wrong with numbering the people?
Because he was flexing his muscle. Look how many soldiers I got.
Look how many soldiers I've got. And if I know how many soldiers I've got, then I know who I can go beat up. Kind of bottom line, I suppose. But God didn't really want the people to be numbered that way. Because the more people you have, the more you have the tendency to stick your thumbs in your lapels and say, yeah, man, I can take on anybody. But if you don't even know how many soldiers you've got, now who do you have to depend on? Kind of like Gideon, right? And I would go so far as to say that, there's another could have been Gideon moment with Saul, King Saul. Remember the time whenever he was, this was one of the times when he proved to be unfaithful. King Saul had been told by Samuel, you need to stay here with the army until I come and make the sacrifice. And so Saul waited for a while, but as he was waiting for a while, his men kept deserting and deserting and deserting and deserting until finally he said, if I wait any longer, I'm not going to have an army to fight with anymore. So what did he do? He tells Samuel, I forced myself and made a sacrifice. I just had to do it. And you understand why now, Samuel, don't you? And Samuel said, no, we're going to replace you with a man after God's own heart. That's what we're going to do. But I think King Saul missed an opportunity to be another Gideon. Because just exactly as, now his son Jonathan knew that. Remember, there's another, it's actually in the very same story. Jonathan and his armor bearer go up and attack a small troop of Philistines. And one of the things that Jonathan says, God is not limited, I'm paraphrasing here, but God is not limited to save by many or by few. And what does Jonathan and his armor bearer do? They whomp them bad. They whomp them bad and actually start the victory that ultimately Israel enjoyed. Because God is not limited by how many people you've got. The point being very simple here is that God really wants us to depend upon Him, not our strength, not our numbers, not our bank account, not any of the usual things that people think are so important. He wants us to depend upon Him. Well, verse 11, and then I've got to kind of finish. Ephraim has multiplied altars for sin. How many altars did God authorize? One. But they have been multiplying these altars for worshiping idols and false gods. He said, in verse 12, I wrote for them 10,000 precepts of my law, but they're regarded as a strange thing. And this word for strange thing is actually the same word for a foreign thing. Now, we may know about foreign culture and foreign customs and that kind of stuff, but is that anything that really affects us personally? Not really. Oh, that's kind of interesting that the Italians after dinner, they go walking around the streets and visiting with their neighbors. That's a custom of theirs. But it's kind of interesting to know, but doesn't affect me. And he's saying the same thing is going on here. I've given you so many laws, and yet, and they are from God, they're from me, but you're looking at them like, so? They're a strange thing. So? That's what's going on here. As for my sacrificial gifts, he says, they sacrifice flesh and eat it, but the Lord has taken no delight in them. And he's making reference here to the peace offerings. The idea of a peace offering essentially is that you were dining with God. That's what was going on. You would make a sacrifice, and part of it would be burnt up, part of it would be given to the priest, but then the family would end up eating the rest of it. And the idea was that you're dining with God. What's God saying here? I'm refusing your invitation. Thank you very much. Instead, what I think I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go home and I'm going to remember all of the offenses and insults that you've given to me. And verse 14 is finally, the coup de grace. Israel has forgotten its maker. That's the deal. Israel had forgotten. That's their essential mistake. Forgetting God and forgetting the covenant. Instead, they decided to build up safe cities, and God says, I'm going to tear all of those down. Transitioning over to the devotional thought, I did want to think about for just one more moment sowing to the wind and reaping. Because, of course, before Hosea wrote these words, Solomon had written a book that talked about pursuing vain and empty things, that it was useless and never turns out what you think it's going to be, what you thought it would be, which was the answer, right? Oh, if I only had this, oh boy, would I be happy. Hosea goes a step further, though, and notes that pursuit of vain and empty things would not only end up going, ending in nothingness, but worse, bring destruction. And these messages, I believe, are really important and critical for us today because we live in a world that pursues an awful lot of vain and empty things. And if we're not careful as Christians, we can get sucked off into that sort of stuff just as easily as these Israelites did. Things that promise importance and security and prestige and so many other things. But in the end, can frequently end up being disappointment and worse still, destruction to us. Perhaps this evening you're a Christian, but perhaps the world has begun to play a bigger role in your life than you know it really needs to be. We want to encourage you to change your mind about that. Give your heart back to the Lord. You can do that right exactly where you sit. Just change your heart. But if it happens to be you'd like to ask for prayers, we stand ready to pray with you. If you're not a Christian, we encourage you to become a Christian and to know this evening that if you were to die this very evening, you'd be going to heaven. This evening, if you need to respond to the invitation, we encourage you to come forward while we stand and